Hello, I'm George Liston, CA. Welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. It's said that when Honoré de Balzac was asked what he did for a living, he replied, "I stand at the side of a highway and hold up a mirror to all who pass by." The story may be apocryphal, but its meaning is undeniable. Literature helps us discover who we are. Its power is so great that fictional characters far removed from us in space, time, ethnicity, and gender can illuminate our own lives and even transform them. So it is at once natural and magical that a group of young women could meet in Tehran in the middle of the last decade and find their own mirrors in the works of Jane Austen, Henry James, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Mike Gold, all of whom wrote in places and times that were somehow distant yet near. My guest is Azar Nafisi, author of Reading Lolita in Tehran. Azar, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for this really quite wonderful book, which we are just about to discuss. And let me begin the discussion this way, Azar. The story very obviously begins in the living room of your home in Tehran, where you organize a seminar for 7 very bright, engaging young women. And there it proceeds to all kinds of miraculous outcomes. But I thought it also had, in a larger sense, a beginning far prior to that. And maybe it's this, to go right to the question, that you must have developed at some early point in life a sense of the interworkings of fiction and reality. Did you, and when did you do that?
You're very right. I don't even know when the story began. I think it really began when my father would tell me stories at bedtime, and that started before I could read and write. I was around 3 o'clock, I say. I was around 3 years old. Mm-hmm. And that became a way of communicating with him. And later on, we would make up stories. Even we created a coded language where if he wanted to tell me something, mm-hmm. or if he was mad at me, he would tell me in a story.
Right.
So stories became a place to go to see reality and reconstruct it.
See reality and reconstruct it. I appreciate that, because it seems to me that someone like yourself, who both writes and teaches so well, largely sees life through stories, or as a story. Maybe in the way all of us who love books see it that way.
Well, you know, I think that stories are as essential to our survival as mm-hmm. bread and water. Mm-hmm. You live in such a transient state. Nothing is forever. Right. And the only thing that is forever is the way you safeguard memory. Uh-huh. And I think that the way you safeguard memory is through stories. So in one sense, I see storytelling as a protest against death, you know.
That's very interesting, because I know one of the things, and we'll talk about this later, you're currently involved with is a book on loss.
Yeah.
And a book, I would suppose, in some measure, about dealing with the ultimate loss, which is death. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think I just finished reading actually John Didion's marvelous book, The Year of Magical Thinking. Mm-hmm. And it is amazing that you even control or allow yourself to become insane without letting insanity control you when you're faced with grief. Through telling the story, through articulating.
That's absolutely right. I hadn't thought about that.
The way you live, you know.
That's very insightful. Azar, I also thought that there's another route to what happens in that living room in Tehran that involves all of Persia, all of Iran, and all of Persian culture, that it is a nation, a people, a culture with a very deep sense of storytelling, of epic poetry. I, for example, personally have never met a Persian Iranian who could not recite poetry.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. It is so strange because I just finished writing an introduction to Dick Davis's translation of the Book of Kings, Ferdowsi's epic poet Book of Kings. And one of the reasons I wrote that introduction, I remember how my father kept telling me that our country has been constantly invaded and constantly conquered. And the only way we survived was through the language and through the poetry. And that is what Ferdowsi did. He recreated Iran's mythical as well as real history through thousands of pages of the Book of Kings. So we essentially, what we have as a nation, what gives us identity as a nation is our poetry, is our language. And so poetry is very much part of us rather than being something you recite or you...
That helps me understand a lot, because that, in a sense, I don't want to overdo it, but it strikes me that that would predispose this very bright group of young women to see language, to see stories as things they can relate to the circumstances which surround them, literally swirl outside the door.
Yeah, and especially at a time when you have the state defining for you what your traditions are, what your history is, and you feel segregated from the past, which was so close to you.
Exactly. In fact, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I have a couple of, to me at least, very interesting questions about what the state does when it tries to do that to people, what the effect on the people and the society. And to cut right to the title here, Lolita, which fascinates all Western readers, particularly when you see that in Lolita in Tehran. That search for truth involves empathy, another point you emphasize a great deal. So, Azar, the question is, even dealing with the complexity of the 7 women, all of them very different, what resonates so much about Lolita to them? What is the epiphany of truth they would find in the story of Nabokov's Lolita?
Well, one thing that I wanted to stress before responding to your question was that I was not using these books, and especially Lolita, as an allegory of our lives. And I really dislike it when we try to only read books because they affirm something that we already know. So, but I think that when you read books for the pleasure of reading them, just for their own sakes, then they open to you, and they give you so many levels of themselves. So on one hand, Lolita is such a beautiful book, and it's such a poignant book. You just completely go heartbroken over what happens to Lolita herself. But on another level, we were living in a country in which you had, again, the state recreating your image, imposing their own dreams and their own images upon our reality. So for my students, it was very easy to understand how criminal Humbert's imposition of his own dream of his lost love was when he tried to impose that upon Lolita, and he deprived Lolita of her own reality. And that is, I think, one of the most criminal acts in novel after novel, and especially Nabokov, who is very concerned with individual freedoms.
This is why your interpretation, and this book is enjoying enormous success, as we both know. And I think what you just said has to be a major part of it, because this is the 50th anniversary of Lolita's publishing.
Yes, and it sold all the 50,000 copies.
This year?
The anniversary copy.
And largely for the same reasons it sold the first time. It's still an issue of great controversy in this society. There's voices raised on both sides. I think it's a wonderful work of art. But until reading your book, I had not focused on the fact that his total control of her. And therefore his kind of making her almost a non-person or a lesser person. That is really the heart of it.
He turns her into, and that's why he says, I wanted to keep Lolita on an island of frozen time, because he doesn't want her to change. He stops her, and because he doesn't want to change. And this relates to all tyrannical mindsets, not just governments or policymakers. We can do it in our everyday life, and novels become microcosms of the larger world.
And on that very point, let me see if I can build on it again in reference to the book. When you say what the outside tyranny of the so-called Islamic Republic was doing, it seemed to me, brought through the pages of your book, that the essence of that tyranny and the essence of Humbert's tyranny over Lolita is to try to control all the private space.
Yeah.
to rule out the imagination.
Yeah. And it goes back also to what you said. You mentioned empathy. And I think that compassion or empathy comes out of the fact that we allow ourselves to see others the way they see themselves, or as the narrator said in To Kill the Mockingbird, to put their shoes on and walk around in their shoes. Now, what Humbert does, in order to impose his own image on Lolita, he has to become blind towards her needs, her demands, and to constantly belittle her, to say that like she liked to chew gums, she would be bribed with money. I mean, everything that any ordinary American 12-year-old might do. And even if it is vulgar, it does not mean that we can invade her space and not allow her to be vulgar even.
Exactly.
You know.
Azar, in a kind of a parallel sense, the Humberts were running Iran at this time.
They wouldn't like it.
They wouldn't like it, but it seems to me, I'll say it, because it seems to me that that attempt to deprive people of private space, particularly women, seems to be at the forefront of it. But they're presenting it, or the world is interpreting it, maybe that's the better way to say it, as, quote, an Islamist phenomenon. Quite frankly, I got the sense as I read this book that that might not be it. That really isn't it. That really tyrannies are pretty much the same, and maybe this is a question of appropriation of a faith rather than acting in terms of faith.
You just don't know how appreciative I am of this question, because when I came back to U.S., I felt how ironic that I left that country partly because the image of what I was or my country was confiscated now and redefined by a few people in power. And I come to this country, which is free, which gives me so many choices. And yet that image remains confiscated here as well. You know, I talk to people, even very well-read or well-informed journalists who tell you things like, oh, but this is your culture, or you're Western. You know, it's like me telling them burning witches in Salem is your culture and not Emerson and Thoreau. You know, so this is what is troublesome. As you mentioned, they not only confiscated the freedom of atheists or Christians or Jews or Zoroastrians, they also confiscated the right of Muslims to be what they want to be. There's so many different interpretations of what a Muslim is.
Exactly, exactly. You know, to mention quick points on both surrounding this question. I've had the advantage of knowing and do know and have lots of friends from Iran, so it's an advantage for me in that sense. But for example, after 9/11, I think there was an enormous march of sympathy in Tehran. But I don't think that got so commented here.
It didn't get. It is so amazing that it was estimated that over 40,000 people showed up in the streets of Tehran in sympathy with American people after 9/11, and they were carrying roses and candles, and the police attacked them. Many were jailed. And yet in this country, where we are so worried about our image in other parts of the world, so little mention is made. But if somebody in Iran today says really bad things about U.S., everybody turns it into headlines.
Yeah, this is true. This is it's a major subject about how we interpret the world, and I think there's a lot that needs to be corrected.
It's a sense of contempt for the people. Of those countries. Only the elite get the headlines. And despite the fact that everyone here knows that government does not represent those people, otherwise the jails would not be so full. Despite that, they only give the space to the elite or those who call themselves representative of the people. They don't go to the culture.
Well said. I mean, many things are uncovered, and one of them, for example, is actually the subject of this question that flows right on from what we're talking about. As a reader, one of the inferences I drew from this book, this concerns 7 very bright young women, as I've said, and it touches upon the state of Iranian society very profoundly, and obviously with a very profound sense of women. But it also made me thoughtful about young men and the kind of, to put it bluntly, hell they might be inhabiting. In the sense, there's one young man who's mentioned, he sort of at the side of the Nima. He's the husband of one of the young women, I think. And I kept thinking that, you know, for a bright young man like him, he must get frustrated as the women he would like to sort of be naturally with taken away.
Yeah, when you restrict half of the population in that manner, you're in fact taking away the right from the other half to also be able to enjoy life or to its fullest. And you are right. A lot of times women get the attention partly because they are the canaries in the mine.
Right. Yeah.
But young men are not only deprived of a natural and organic relationship with the opposite sex or among themselves, but they are also very much harassed. I remember when I was in Iran, some of my students or sons of my friends would be beaten up really badly for what was called rap attitude or haircut or short-sleeved T-shirts. You know, so this is an attempt not to spread a religion. It is an attempt to impose a uniformity upon the population and to control the population. It's very similar to Soviet Union and China.
This now you almost introduced my question for me with that because no, perfectly, because early in your book you give us a word from at least from Russia, if not from the Soviet Union, that Nabokov used, Plushnost.
Yes.
This is artificiality, is it not?
Yeah.
And it seems to me, and in my one notes I wrote about this, I wrote down, this makes what I called a wheel of distortion. You know, a society this artificial makes everyone artificial.
Yeah, it makes everyone, I mean, because of the fact that they do want to turn everyone into their own image, you know, and that image becomes artificial, and they go into the extremes and usually create this very sentimental or overly emotional view, because there used to be slogans on the walls in Tehran where it said, wearing ties mean you're an imperialist agent. Right. So your appearance or my appearance, the way we even look at one another, would be interpreted as a political statement.
Right. I was struck by so much of that, as you say, even looks, glances, any kind of natural.
And it's very much, I mean, I keep telling my students, go and watch some of the old, first of all, watch some of the old Soviet art and read their propaganda. But that movie, wonderful Greta Garbo movie, Ninuchka, where Greta Garbo was a Soviet functionary coming to Europe, and she was denouncing everything that had to do with life as decadent. But she goes back to Soviet Union and she has bought some lingerie, and her roommate tells her, this lingerie is very dangerous, and she says, I don't want my underwear to undermine the state. Because even her underwear becomes a matter of state imposition.
I'm glad you cite that. I love old movies, so that's Turner Classic Movies is where I spend
yes,
a lot of my time.
I'm very happy for Turner Classic Movies.
The point is that for me, the highest point of the entire book comes when literature confronts everything you and I are talking about, and that is the trial of the Great Gatsby. And this is where you have, to put it just in a sentence, you have this sort of ideologue in your class, a number of them, who are there to kind of make things difficult. And you run a trial, you represent the book, and an extraordinary young woman named Azar is the defense attorney. So this whole thing should be read, must be read, but if you had to define in a sentence or two what the meaning of that trial was, what came out of it, what would you say?
Well, because he was not reading the book as a reader. He was reading it as a prosecutor. So I thought, okay, you're reading it as a prosecutor. Let's see what the book has to say in its own defense. And I think Zareen was the most wonderful person to defend the book, because in the end, what we came up with was that no matter even how prejudiced the writer himself might be, a great work of art has to create an area of empathy and an open space where even the writer's own life might be questioned. And Fitzgerald might have even ruined his life because of his obsession with wealth. But the villains in the story are the wealthiest. They're Tom and Daisy Buchanan, who, like Humbert, are careless with other people's lives. And so a great work of art goes beyond its own time, goes beyond its own author. And I don't think that it should be deliberately political or didactic. It should put the reader in the experience of the book and not look down on the reader and spell out everything for them.
You know, I completely agree, and you might agree with me that this is the ongoing struggle of literature in every society, even ours here.
Yes, over here, definitely. I mean, that is why every time I give a talk, I have a slogan now where I say, "Readers of the world, unite." And you know, and I tell, especially my American friends, that activism is not just every once in a while marching on Washington. You have to look the way your libraries are going under. You have to look at the system of education. You have to look at the books we are not reading to understand that this culture can also face the same things that ours did.
Exactly,
you know.
exactly. That's the beauty of it. I mean, for me, there's worlds of examples. I find renewal in War and Peace every time I read it. About life now, you know.
I'm so glad. You see, so many people look at War and Peace and say, "Oh, God, it's so long."
No, it's life. I mean, someone said, well, how do you classify this? Do you call this a novel? And someone even wiser said, no, this is life.
It is so true.
I'd love to get a word about your next work that we mentioned briefly in the beginning, but it is about loss, and it intrigued me as I read that, and I want you to tell us, but this is what life is about largely, too.
Yeah, it is about loss, and it came, it started out of a very personal experience. As I was writing the acknowledgements to this book, my mother died, and I kept feeling that the only way I can retrieve her loss would be to re-know her through rewriting about her. And as I was doing that, I realized that loss always presupposes wealth, because you must have something to have lost. And my mother did not have the luxury that I had to lose, because she never had a mother. Her mother died when she was very young, and she had no memory of my grandmother. And so I tried to retrieve the times that my grandmother was for my mother as a gift to her now that she was gone. And this is how the book started. So now it is about the lives of these women, beginning with 19th century Iran, late 19th century Iran, coming to the present, within the context of the changes. And I am again using, actually this time, Persian literature to frame those lives.
I very sincerely look forward to that.
Thank you.
Really do. Speaking of things that, thinking of the past, the future, this experience and how it informs others, you did the seminar that is at the heart of reading Lolita in Tehran in the mid-90s, 95,
yes,
I think,
yes,
a decade
95.
ago. If you had to, have you ever thought about if you were transposed back to Iran now for any length of time and were to reconstitute a seminar with a different set of young women, what authors or themes you might be incorporating, given the changes in Iran, the changes in Azar, Nafisi, the changes in who's writing? I mean, Zora Neale Hurston, for example.
Yes, Zora Neale Hurston, you know, nowadays I teach her always with Jane Austen. I think there are two women who in their own time were criticized for not being political, and yet they are the most liberating. I mean, Zora Neale Hurston's tale of liberation goes to so many levels, and she's almost invents a new language for talking about it. But you know, I mentioned in my book that I'm very promiscuous about books. It's very difficult choice. Some of them I might repeat. I would like to add something by Orhan Pamuk, actually, so that we share so much with Turkey. But also, I haven't talked about many of the books that I did teach. So we read Anna Karenine, we read Flaubert, we read Muriel Spark. We read a lot of people that I haven't mentioned here. So it's endless.
It is endless. That's the beauty of it.
And it is good. this is one of the few questions that I don't feel worried about if I cannot come up with a quick answer, because so many names are racing through my mind.
Well, that is the greatest answer, though.
And of course, I need to. I love to teach Rushdie in Iran. I think it's essential that my people understand him the way they were never allowed to.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think that's a wonderful answer, because what it says is, and it's the most beautiful thing about reading books, there is no end of great and meaningful literature. And also the fact that you can get involved in the literature of other cultures and find they tell you things you need to know.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that some Persians were saying, well, if you're a Persian, you should be writing about Persian literature. And I told them that the whole purpose of literature is to get out of yourself. I want to talk, I mean, my field was English lit. I love the novel. I want some American or some French or some British person talk about my language so that I learn something that I didn't know before. And I think literature is in a republic of its own, without any boundaries.
That's a nice phrase. That's a very good one. Speaking of republics and countries, throughout this book, again, I was very impressed with what an enormous presence America is, either as, to use Fitzgerald's phrase, this side of paradise or the great Satan. One way or the other, it's there.
I know. Yes, America has played such an amazing role. Of course, in my life, because I spent the best years of my youth in this country, and I learned about so many things here. But in my own country, because the government turned America into the great Satan, and nothing is much more tempting than becoming the great Satan. So America became ever present, and I think the best aspects of it where we all, I can almost say almost anyone I knew, we would spend hours watching Forbidden American videos.
Yes, right.
I renewed my love for Marx Brothers and Woody Allen, and I would be watching them with my children. You know, Mogambo, Ninuchka, in fact. As well as the books. They were our the best ambassadors to my country.
Well, you're a wonderful ambassador, I must say, Azar Nafisi.
Thank you.
And you know, I must say, just personally, another great thing about this great book is you read it and you wonder, is the person behind this as remarkable as the book? And I think
you find out now.
No, I found it indeed, yes. In fact, I'm just going to close with one comment. Nuala O'Fallon, the great Irish writer, who I very especially love, said once that you must read as if your life depended on it. And I think that's your spirit.
That's lovely.
That's your spirit.
That's lovely.
Though.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And that's our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Networks. Please join us again right here next week, and thank you for watching.
Well, this was so much fun.
For me, it was great.